today and on the next 2 Sundays, we're going to be traveling back in time somewhat, sharing 3 sermons from 3 series from the past. If you want to know what those series are, they're on the back of your worship bulletin this morning. You helped determine those by your vote over the past few weeks. Now, I'm kind of curious about this vote that we took over the last few weeks. As we tabulated those votes, I kept thinking, are folks voting for these things because they actually remember these series and remember some of the sermons, or do they just look like interesting topics? Or are they topics that you say, I can't remember him preaching about that, but it looked kind of interesting. Maybe I'd like to hear something about that. Interestingly, and I don't know if you all got together and made this decision, almost all of the series got at least 1 vote, which I found very interesting. Now, my low self-esteem person says that you all figured that out, and out of sympathy, you said be sure and spread your vote out so that he feels good about all the series that you presented. As I look back over the series, I had a wonderful time looking at all the various topics and issues and things that we looked at over the past 10 years. All the 3 top vote getters were actually a series from the summers, 2004, 2010, and 2006, respectively. You might remember that generally in the summer, over the past 10 years, the series that I've offered, I've called them a bit lighter series. We've kind of done some fun things with those and been a little lighter in our theological and scriptural approach to the message for those 3 months. I want to utilize these 3 sermons in these 3 weeks in 3 ways. One, I want to do some reminiscing. And I told you last week that I'm moving into that mode a bit, and you're going to have to bear with me, and you're going to have to indulge me over the next few weeks, because I'm going to do some reminiscing over the past 10 years, and with these sermons, I'm certainly doing that. The second thing, though, that I'm hoping that we can do is lift up some very key themes that are very deep and very personal for me. As I have been a pastor over the last 30 years, there's some issues around the gospel, there's some themes, there's some theological messages that have become very personal to me and very important to me, and you've allowed me to share those over the past 10 years, and I'm hoping in these 3 sermons that some of those most important to me are going to be lifted up over the next 3 weeks. However it happened, and I don't know how that vote came to be, all 3 of the series that we picked for this series contain very critical and important themes that are very personal to me. So it worked out well in that way. There's a third thing I want to do with these sermons, though, and with lots of other things I hope I do over the next 3 weeks. And that's, I hope, to prepare us for the future. Yours as a congregation and mine as a pastor, I want to use these sermons and hopefully some other means throughout the next few weeks to express the joy and the possibilities which lie ahead, both for you as a congregation and for me as a pastor as we separate and go our separate ways. At the top of that list is the reality that you're being placed, beginning July 1st, in very capable and very experienced and very seasoned and very caring hands of a pastor in our conference. Pastor Janet has been a pastor for almost 30-some years. She's pastored churches, she's been a district superintendent, she's been in a lot of different positions, and I'm excited about her coming here. I think it's a good match, and I feel very excited about your future with her, and I will hope that these sermons and other words that I share over the next few weeks will help us to look to the future with great hope and great expectation for what will come. So let's turn to God's bus, first aired August 15th of 2010. If you remember right, during that summer, what we did was we took some familiar movies of the time, and we looked at a bit of a longer clip of those movies than usual. I tend to show maybe a minute or two. That summer we looked at a clip that would last 3 or 4 minutes, and then we would talk about the theology that's presented from that particular movie clip. I remember worrying a bit as I presented that series about talking about movies and about watching movies in worship. I still have that kind of message in me that I could hear this little voice out there. And it wasn't any of you in particular, but I hear this little voice like, why are we coming to church to watch a movie? I could watch a movie at home. I want to hear a preacher preach. So I carried that worry with me into that series until I began to look for some resources as I prepared that series. And the resources are many. Resources about using movies in worship and in sermons and the theology of movies and the messages that we get from movies. And I began to realize that indeed God speaks to us in a variety of ways. And if we're going to listen to God, and if God comes to us through a variety of channels, we need to be looking in a variety of places for that to happen. And one of those places is through the medium that we call movies. Movies can be very powerful. Movies can move us. Movies can impact us. And movies can certainly give us messages for life and for faith. The movie on August 15th of 2010 was Forrest Gump. And we're going to look at a clip today from Forrest Gump. You know the movie, but let me give you a very, very brief synopsis of the movie. It is the self-told story of a mentally retarded adult man named Forrest. It's told to a variety of people who come to sit by him while he is waiting for a bus, a city bus. Now sometimes you forget that he's actually sitting there telling the story because, of course, the movie shows the story of his life and takes you through all of these experiences he has, from growing up to war in Vietnam and his being a soldier there, to his enterprise with his shrimp boat, to his friends, to his marriage, everything that happens to him. Occasionally it comes back to him sitting there, and there'll be the same person sitting with him or a new person who's come up to sit with him while he's waiting on the bus. Today's clip is a scene that Forrest is describing his first day of school and his first time to get on the school bus for his first day of school. And then he takes a minute or two to describe his friendship with his Jenny. Let's watch the clip.
Do your very best now, Forrest.
I sure will, Mama.
I remember the bus ride on the first day of school very well.
Are you coming along?
Mama said not to be taking rides from strangers.
This is the bus to school.
I'm Forrest Gump.
I'm Dorothy Harris.
Well, now we ain't strangers anymore. Slate's taken. Taken. Can't sit here.
You know, it's funny what a young man recollects, 'cause I don't remember being born.
I don't recall what I got for my first Christmas, and I don't know when I went on my first outdoor picnic, but I do remember the first time I heard the sweetest voice in the wide world.
You can sit here if you want.
I had never seen anything so beautiful in my life. She was like an angel.
Well, you're gonna sit down, aren't you?
What's wrong with your legs?
I'm nothing at all, thank you. My legs are just fine and dandy.
I just sat next to her on that bus and had a conversation all the way to
Mama
school.
says my back's crooked like a question mark. These are gonna make me
And
as
next to
straight as
Mama,
an arrow. They're
no
my
one
magic
ever talked to
shoes.
me or asked me questions.
Are you stupid or something?
Mama says stupid as stupid does.
I'm Jenny.
I'm Forrest Gump.
From that day on, we was always together. Jenny and me was like peas and carrots. She taught me how to climb.
Come on, Forrest, you can do it.
I showed her how to dangle.
Good little monkey.
She helped me learn how to read,
And
and I showed her how to swing. Sometimes we just sit out and wait for the stars.
Mama's gonna worry about me.
Just stay a little longer.
For some reason, Jenny didn't ever want to go home.
Okay, Jenny, I'll stay.
She was my most special friend. My only friend.
So, using this school bus scene, we're going to look very briefly at 7 theological points, or what I prefer to call faith and life issues, with what I will today call God's bus. So on God's bus, first of all, we're not waiting for the bus. God's bus is waiting for us to step aboard. Now this is a little bit theologically tricky because we're actually already on the bus. When we're born on God's bus. But there is some decision involved along the way, isn't there? There is some decision on our part on whether we're going to really ride that bus, or we're going to accept those tempting transfers that come along. There are many buses that offer us a journey through life. Some of them are good, some of them aren't so good. None of them are like God's bus. God's bus is the only one that really brings meaning and fulfillment to our lives. Now, I was going to list some of those wrong buses that we get on sometimes. I'm going to assume that you know what those are. You and I both, at various times in our lives, had climbed aboard a bus, whatever it might be. And at some point we realized this is not the bus. This is not the bus that, even though it's tempting and even though it's a wonderful bus, is not going to offer us the fulfillment and the meaning that we need for our lives. So God's bus is waiting for us to climb aboard, and God's bus is waiting for us to say, yes, I want to ride this bus. Second, God is the driver of God's bus. Now this is again a little bit theologically tricky. Because if you say God's the driver of the bus, then that means basically all we do is sit back and God takes us wherever God chooses, and we don't have any decision about that. I just preached a few weeks ago about the whole issue of God being a micromanager in our lives, and that certainly there's some amount of freedom in our lives and decisions we make that affect our lives and where we're going. So I prefer to say that God is not really the driver, but God is the driving force in our life when we choose to be on God's bus. Now, it may be a little bit hard for you to image God as a crotchety woman with a cigarette hanging out of her mouth on the bus. told Steve this morning, I said, that's a great scene. I can't imagine any bus in America at this point in American history having a bus driver with a cigarette hanging out of her mouth talking crotchety. But it may be hard to look at that and say, wow, that's God. But I want to invite you to really look at Dorothy closely. Because if you look closely, there's kind of a crotchiness there, and there's a cigarette hanging out of her mouth. And she was a little bit hard, and she was a little bit practical. This is the bus to school, you know. Get on. I like to think of God sometimes like that. I like to think of God saying, Jay, get on the bus. Come on. And then give me a smile. Because that's what Dorothy does. She says, get on the bus. We know each other now. And she smiles through the smoke. That's a valid image of God, I think. Third theological point. As Forrest and Dorothy remind us, God knows us by name. Now, names are important. Names, and when people know our names, we know that people really know us. Isaiah uses those exact words that Stephanie read this morning. Isaiah says that God knows us by name. I have formed you. You are mine. Let those other buses pass by. This is the right bus for you, because I chose you, and I know you by name. Climb aboard. Fourth theological point. Riding on God's bus is not always the easiest of journeys. As I watch, every time I watch this clip and I watch Forrest walk down that aisle and get rejection after rejection after rejection, I think back to those times. Times when I was young, times when I've been older, that there has been rejection. Things didn't go quite the way I wanted them to go. What I chose to do, where I chose to go, what I wanted to do, didn't quite happen. I watched Forrest walk down that aisle and face rejection, face hate, face persecution. And I remember that God's bus isn't a bus without the difficulties of life. But Isaiah reminds us by saying, when you pass through the waters, through the rivers, through the fire, I will be with you. Isaiah does not say that when you get on God's bus, you aren't going to have to go through any waters, you aren't going to have to go through any rivers, you aren't going to have to go through any fires. You'll never have to face rejection. You never have to face hatred. You'll never have to face persecution. What Isaiah does promise is that God will be with us as we face those times. And God will not let those things overwhelm us. Isaiah uses that word. You will not be overwhelmed. You may feel overwhelmed at times. You may think this is the thing that is going to overwhelm me. Isaiah promises that God will see us through even those times. Fifth theological point. On God's bus, we will hear voices. Strange indeed. Hearing voices. Now, as strange as that is, let me remind you that voices come in all kinds of forms. Sometimes voices are nudges. Sometimes voices are tugs at the heart. Sometimes voices are just plain helpful information. The voices that we hear on God's bus come from many sources. They come from the Bible. They come from the faith community we call the church. They come from people who care about us. Forrest heard a voice on that bus. In the midst of his journey down that aisle of rejection, he heard a voice. And for him, it was the voice. He didn't know it at the time, but this is the theological point. It is the voice of salvation. It is the voice of salvation that says, whatever it is you face, from anything and from everything that would seem to overwhelm you, I will be with you. And there's a place for you on this bus. Which leads us to our sixth theological point. It's a simple one. There's a seat for everyone. There's room. No matter who you are, no matter where you were born, what you've done good in life, what you haven't done so good in life, the color of your skin, who you are, there's a seat for you on God's bus. We continue to struggle in our country and in our world as a human race, and as a human race that's divided into categories, nations and statuses and haves and have-nots. But God's message, and this is one of those key, critical, personal themes for me. God's message remains constant. There is room for each of us on God's bus. For it is God who formed us and says, "You are mine." And there's a place for you. And finally, seventh theological point. And this is pretty critical. There is a friend on the journey. God becomes flesh for our journey. That's the whole meaning of the gospel. God becomes flesh to be our friend, to journey with us. God becomes flesh in the person we know as Jesus. The hymn says, "What a friend we have in Jesus." Is it a bit corny? Yes. Is it theologically accurate? Absolutely. If you understand Jesus' words when he says, nobody has any greater love than that you lay down your life for a friend. We have a friend on God's bus. Sometimes that friend is incarnated into a real life friend in our world. Someone we know, a friend, a spouse, a mentor, as a part of our lives, and we see in the flesh our friend. Other times it's just a presence. We can't put it in form. We just know that there's someone to go through the journey with us of life. So that's it. Thank you to Forrest for helping us see 7 fairly simple and yet profound theological points and faith and life issues. God says to us, "Do not be afraid on my bus. I am with you. I've called you each by name. Come and follow me. I'll bring you home when you get on this bus because I love you and you're mine. I have called you each by name. Come and follow me. I will bring you home. I love you and you are mine." Would you pray with me?